You already know the Gestalt principles, you just don't realize it yet. Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Tirso. I said you already know the Gestalt principles because they exist in the world. So if the world is already organized for us, why should we as designers organize information any differently? I don't want you to confuse the Gestalt principles with the design principles because they are different. The design principles are based on theory and aesthetic. The Gestalt principles are based on psychology and perception. I'll try to call out the differences in the examples. Definitely stay for the last one. I promise it'll be worth it. This is a big video, so grab some snacks, your favorite blanket, maybe light a candle. We are going to be here for a little bit. Here is my guide to the Gestalt principles. There are 7 Gestalt principles: symmetry, similarity, proximity, common region, continuation, closure, and figure ground. These principles will help you organize information and communicate more effectively. I think the best way to go through this is through real-world examples. Symmetry is about how we perceive balance. Our brains are trained to find symmetrical things more pleasing because they feel stable and harmonious. We as humans are symmetrical, as well as animals and insects. We can also see this in architecture like churches, or one of my favorite buildings, the Pantheon, which is a circle connected to a golden rectangle. Similarity helps you group things together. We naturally connect things that are visually similar. You can do this through color, like the produce section of grocery stores. This helps us easily identify and differentiate sections, except for parsley and cilantro, which is also something you have to be conscious about in design. If elements are too similar, you can confuse people. Other examples of color are uniforms, as in flight crews and sports teams. In New York City, all the trains are grouped by color if they share a similar track. You can also use similarity through shapes. Traffic lights are universally circles, beer bottles are similar shapes, even doors. Depending on the shape, we have an idea of how to interact with the door. The natural convention is to turn this one goes down. If it looks like this, then we pull, and this one we push. And if the door doesn't function with these standards, it is considered a Norman door after Don Norman. Another video for another time. Last, you can use similarity through size. The quickest example are modular grids such as calendars, the apps on your phone. Yes, I organize my apps by color, bleacher seating, parking lots, etc. Proximity is another method for grouping things together, which is done through spacing. When things are closer together, we naturally assume that they're related. For the example, in the grocery store, you'll find spices in the same area, meats in another area, etc. If you're at a restaurant, people are closer together if they're eating together and separated by space between the tables if they're not. Common region is often used with proximity, but it is about grouping elements within a boundary. Countries are separated by borders and have independent governments. Houses and apartments are regions, grouping families or roommates. Planes, trains, and automobiles group people going in the same direction or a similar destination. Continuation guides our eyes along a path, which helps create flow in your designs. The easiest and most literal example are lines or cues. You just follow everyone else. Of course, my example is the queue at Wimbledon. I love the use of the letter Q. One can assume that the rest of the letters are still waiting in line. On subway maps, trains are delineated by color, and we instinctively know to follow them. In photographs or movies, when a subject looks in a direction, we have a tendency to also look in the same direction they are. In sports, our eyes naturally follow the ball or the player when they're running with the ball. I have a great example to explain how Gestalt principles work with design principles. Of course, tennis! The ball used to be white, so naturally our eyes follow the ball, which is the Gestalt principle of continuation. However, the lines on the tennis court are also white, so people struggle to follow the ball. Today, they are the neon yellow, so you could see it better, which is the design principle of contrast. Closure is when our brains fill in the gaps to complete the whole image. I feel like this one is more situational, but it is indeed a Gestalt principle. When you're driving, the dashed lines still read as a continued path. Handicap signs are often unfinished, but we complete them anyway. If you've done crosswords or played Wordle, filling in a few letters helps you deduce the full word. Closure can also work with context. When someone makes hand gestures, your brain fills in what's happening without having the full picture. Brands don't have to overtly tell you that they're healthy or fresh. We align them naturally if their branding shows fresh ingredients. However you feel about Tesla, they did a great job with their original advertising. They didn't show their cars in their commercials, they only talked about a sustainable future. So we naturally close any gaps of information between sustainability and their cars. Figure ground is a relationship between the foreground and the background. We tend to only focus on one, never both. This principle helps create a sense of depth in your designs. Most, if not all of you, have seen the Rubin vase illusion. Your brain alternates between seeing a vase or the two faces. If you see text on storefront windows, you alternate focusing on the text, the figure, and inside the store, the ground. For people that look at the sky and create shapes from the clouds in their minds, the figure is the perceived shape and the rest of the sky becomes the ground. Reflections in water, we either focus on the reflection itself or the water surface. Now, let's put everything into context. One caveat for the examples, they are simply examples on how you can use the Gestalt principles. The goal for you would be first understanding and then figure out your own approach on how to implement them. Here is our content. It is a restaurant I ate at in New York. Let's start with symmetry. We need to anchor the layout to the center, so here is the center. I'll center align our headline and the deck. For the images, we can put one on each side and then our text. You can't center this because the line length would be diabolical, so we run it as 2 columns to maintain that symmetry. I'll fix the rags, add some color to the title, and that's our example of symmetry. Let's do a quick variation of this layout using my favorite grid, 7 columns. We just split the page vertically. This time I'll split the page horizontally, and we can add one image on top and the other on the bottom. Right now, it splits the page into 4 quadrants. We can add more visual interest by aligning to the grid like this. The rest of the space can be used for the text. I'll remove the grid so it's easier to see. The text is running short, so let's look at our elements. The deck supports the head. Since they're meant to be read together, we can group them. The body copy is already grouped because there aren't any spaces. One of the ways we group information is by proximity. We can simply increase the space in between the deck and the body copy with enough space so that our text aligns at the bottom. And that's it, nice and easy. The next example, for the content, I reduced the text and added a sidebar. Without designing anything, we already know this is how the information should be grouped. I'm using a 3-column grid. Since the story about the restaurant is more important, I'm going to allocate 2 columns for that, and the last column will be for the sidebar. This is not a Gestalt principle. These are the design principles of hierarchy and proportion in the context of a grid. Okay, our head and deck, I styled it differently this time. Next, our image, and then the body copy to follow. If you haven't seen my grid videos, I style the text as 2 columns because of the line length, and it breaks up the grid, which gives some visual interest since our grid is so simple. I use a different image, which is visually symmetrical to emphasize the symmetry. Now for our sidebar, the list of restaurants are all of equal importance except for the headline. The spaces between the restaurants are the Gestalt principle of proximity. The names and deep captions are styled exactly the same, which is similarity. When it comes to the design principles, I'm using scale contrast for hierarchy to delineate the restaurant names. I hope I'm not sounding too patronizing, explaining all the details. I do want to demonstrate that there is indeed reasoning and process when it comes to design. Perhaps by the end of this video, you can specifically state what could have worked better in designs that feel off to you. Back to our layout, there really isn't a way to fill the space with the text we have, so we can add an image of one of the restaurants. I'll go with Caviar Caspia because of proximity. It's quite vertical because of the grid. To make it more horizontal, we can bleed it off the right edge. I'm going to stop here to say a few things. When you bleed an image, it suggests that there is more to it versus when you crop an image. For the hero image, I want to show you what happens if you were to bleed it. The balance is thrown off because there is more atmosphere on the left side, and our center figure is no longer centered within the crop. The crop version feels more balanced to me. You don't have to agree with that. What matters is that your designs look like you made the decisions. That wasn't meant to be a threat. Moving on. Even though the sidebar is styled differently, let's explore our options for similarity. There is similarity through color, like the produce at the grocery store. I could argue that the size of the number competes with the headline. By color blocking the sidebar, it recedes and alleviates some of that tension. Another way to use similarity is through shape, which means we need other elements in the sidebar that's not just text. Here is a reduced amount of restaurants, each with a photo. Since color blocking was already a statement, I'll scale back some of the text back to black so that we're not making too many statements. A simple solution to change the shape is to round the corners. Have a look at the current layout. Is there a Gestalt principle you would implement at this stage? For me, it would be proximity. The spacing in between is the same throughout, and they shouldn't be. We know that the design system is caption first and then image, but we're not actually showing that visually. So here is that update. Think of the tables in the restaurant. I want to compare so you see the difference. The left, you could keep it this way, but the right is much clearer and your audience doesn't even have to think about it. Since we're talking about tables in the restaurant and it's a sidebar, let's pretend it's the bar area and the article is the dining room. We would want more space in between the two. Here is that change. If you look at this and think the rounded corners are too subtle, you could change the shape completely to a circle. In this option, the circles are symmetrical. We should also center the text to honor that symmetry. Let's go back to this option. We could separate the sidebar even further by using common region. We simply add a region. In this case, a colored background, and then increase legibility by using the design principle of contrast. Is this starting to make sense? For the other Gestalt principles, we have to change the content. I've decided that all of my content on the channel will be travel or food because that's all I ever take photos of. So here we have an article and then some photos. Same process, our head and deck. For this, I'll add a rule for continuation. You guys see me use this a lot in my work and in my guides. What this line does is draw the viewer's eye down the page. I'll drop it in our text next to the rule. Presumably your eye is already following that line. Does the viewer need it? No. Does it help guide them? It does. I'm going to use another line at the bottom across the spread. When you're designing spreads, you need an element that connects the two pages together so they function as a unit. This line already does that. Since our eye will follow the line across the page, I'm going to add the photo credit line here. Although small, we've drawn attention through continuation. To frame the page, I'm going to add the same line at the top. Let's lay out our images and our text will be adjusted to fit. For hierarchy, I'll start with a hero-ish image in the middle. The left looks too text heavy, so I can add a photo in the bottom left and then drop in the other two images. I would say the rest of the design decisions like the channels and misalignment were just my personal stylistic choices. Let's do another version of this. I'll make the title quite big. This time for continuation, I'm going to run a row of images across the bottom. By the way, the space in the middle is because of the gutter when you open a magazine. So we just drop in some images in here. This isn't actually a line, but I would say it's more inferred. Because they're running in a row, we naturally view all of them left to right. They are random photos, but I did have some purpose in their placement. This sculpture directs the eye into the next photo, which has this horizontal element, and then the image of the guy walking faces right, so the movement of the images emphasize the direction the eye should go in, ideally like this. The text is likely not going to fit in all of that space, so I'll add two large images to balance each other. I want to give these two photos some context, so I can add some captions to the side. It's travel, so maybe a script font could be nice to reference a handwritten postcard. Last, our text. We have some run over, so we need to make room. You can remove the captions to fit the rest of the text, and then our captions can go on the photos themselves. I already knew the text wouldn't fit, so truly I could have gotten to the solution sooner. I did want to show you that you should always work iteratively and not be afraid to pivot when you need to. Going back, the captions are a little too perfect being centered, and if the thought was to reference a postcard, I'm going to style them like this. Quick quiz, what Gestalt principle is this by putting the captions on the photos? Here are your options if you forgot them. It is common region. The photo serves as a region, and because the caption is inside, it will not be confused to relate to anything else on the page. So let's finish the layout. I said we need to connect the two pages together somehow. Using common region again, I'll add a border. I don't mind the images overlapping at the bottom because it creates some dimension. The photo in the top right, however, needs to come inside the box so we see the corner. In theory, you can still bleed it at the top, but bringing it completely in just feels better. As the caption says, hard to explain, easy to feel, so apply that to your design work as well. This is completely unnecessary, but I did remove the deck from this layout. There's no visible space left, but using the Gestalt principle of closure, we can fit it here. You can still read the title even though it's obstructed. There is an element of figure ground happening because your eyes can't focus on the head and deck at the same time. If you want to throw in another figure ground moment, you could add a drop cap like this. We can do a version of this layout with a more purposeful approach to figure ground. Let's make the title even bigger. Without adding any other elements, are you seeing how figure ground will naturally happen? We can use our images to align with the cap height of our title. We'll drop in our text and our first image. Instead of using the second image, I'm going to use a pull quote. I'll even out the text to allocate space. Here is our pull quote. I know it's in a script face, but it feels a little plain, so I'm gonna add more flourishes by swapping some of the characters with their glyphs. I do want to show you that difference, just a polite amount of glyphs swapped out. We're seeing some movement through continuation in these areas, which is nice. Someone may think it's too dramatic, and to them I say, nothing is more dramatic than TikTok faking her death in the US. I also hope this video ages well, we'll see. Back to the layout, perhaps we can add a touch of color. And if you know what I'm going to do, you have learned so much from my channel, if not simply about me as a designer. Here is a background to connect the two pages, but not making it full bleed because it creates these moments of overlap. I would say the layout needs this because there's nothing really going on with it otherwise. Okay, one more, and I promised you it would be worth it. This is the most complex example I've done on the channel. We are going to unload the entire Costco cart of Gestalt Principles towards this. Let's do it together. Here is what I'm working with. There is this overarching title with an intro graph. There is a sidebar on my croissant eating, a by the number section, a photo sidebar that I'm calling Spray and Pray. Sometimes people just hold the shutter and pray a nice photo comes out. I'm sure these people didn't think they'd end up in a stranger's YouTube video. The last sidebar is a decision tree, which is an editorial design convention, and also my way of marking my territory on YouTube. This is the first video on YouTube to show a decision tree in the context of graphic design. Since we have a lot of sections to work with, I'm going to allocate regions for grouping. I imagine the hero will be quite big. The next section can fit underneath, and on this right page, I can divide it into fourths. Maybe 2 sections at the top and then a large section at the bottom. So this is our starting structure for the spread. When we're talking about organizing information, we also have to consider how the information looks visually. I'm going to drop in the content of the other sections and let's assess. On the left side, the hero will be text and 1 image. The section below is also text and 1 image, so we'll need to move that somewhere else. On the right-hand side, the by the number section is stats, so that will likely be in the form of information design. Spray and Pray is just photos, and the last section is the decision tree, which is also information design. So I'll swap the number section for eating and breadlock. The 2 photo sections are next to each other. Since we can't move the photo sidebar anywhere else on the page, we can change the orientation for separation. So this is how my mind is visualizing where the information will go. This may seem a little basic, but I'm showing you because I used to do this when I first started working. Not only did this practice help me produce better design work, I've mastered how to organize information visually just from looking at it. So the big Tirso lesson in this video is that your goal shouldn't be to simply create and design. Your goal should be to master your craft so that you become the tool. Mastering the Gestalt Principles is a great start, so let's finish our layout. Now that we have a mental idea of where all the information is going, let's start with a blank page. Instead of the headline, I'm going to start with the hero photo, which will anchor the page. These are tennis courts at the top of the Swiss Alps, which I am pretty sure is the coolest place I have ever been. I do want it to bleed into the right page to connect them. Then the title. Centered probably feels best since the sky is basically just a color. There's quite a bit of space to fill, so we can try it stacked, but still centered, and then bigger. If you look at how the text is behaving, some designers align to the stem of the capital T, and this is too close to that. Even though this is technically center aligned, it visually feels left aligned. Again, someone who just designs would say, it's centered in InDesign, so it's done. The designer who becomes the tool can visually see it's not centered, so I would adjust it like this so it's fully stacked. Then we can drop our intro graph and photo credit centered underneath. Now we adjust the crop of the photo to make room. Since my text is symmetrical, I do have this corner of the tennis court that I can anchor towards the center as well. Here's that alignment. Last piece, a caption. This is Sport Chalet in Marin, Switzerland, in case anyone wants to go. But great, this section is done. Next, the photo sidebar. I'm doing it in this order because it's helping me frame the page. Knowing that the sidebar will be vertical, I'll start with the image of this weirdo at the top. He doesn't look anything like anyone. Then I'll set a region for the rest of the content to fit. I'll style the headline. I don't want it to be completely separate from the title, but instead nod to it. The rest of the images can fit neatly underneath. It does need some contrast, so I'll pop out one of the images. This next section is pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna use simple styling like this. Okay, moving right along, by the numbers. Let's zoom in here. I'll maintain the styling for the subheads. I'll use a line to draw our eye over to the other page. Now our info. Keeping this simple, I'll use big numbers in the script and sans serif styling for the caption. Same for the next one. Keep in mind that you can alter the information to serve your purpose. The number is 4, but to bound to 2 digits above, I can style it as 04. The next stat can be centered since the other two will be on the opposite side. This was written as 3 out of 4, but I want to retain that only the numbers are in the script. I can style a fraction instead, maybe something like this. The last stat is actually the same. I don't want to repeat the fraction, so it can be rewritten to acknowledge the Guggenheim's left to visit instead. Just tiny details. You can also add information that supports the stat. For the Grand Slams, I can call out how many of each I've attended. If you are a tennis fan, you know what the colors mean. For the Guggenheim, I can list out the cities and cross out the ones I've been to. I can emphasize continuation by using an arrow, a happy accident, but I like how the arrow emphasizes the perspective of the photo. Last touch, everything is kind of floating. I can add some dividers to distinguish them from each other. Also common region, but inferred since they're not fully enclosed. Zooming back out, the last section is the decision tree. Have a look at the layout. What would be your solution to make space? That's right, common region. Now we have all the space. I'll drop in the head and deck. This is going to get a little involved, so I'm going to isolate it. Let's look at the copy. For a decision tree, if information is at the same level, they need to be styled similarly. We have our questions, decisions that lead to other areas, and then answers. Starting with our first one, here is my styling for the questions. Next, we need a styling for the decisions. For the next level, one goes to an answer, the other goes to another question. I'll continue one more level down. There's a lot of information we still need to fit. The tree is already getting imbalanced with a majority of the information in this area. So that's where I'm going to maintain the focus to be. Instead of anchoring towards the first question, I'm going to anchor towards the first decision and work backwards to the first question and the other decision and then the other answer. Now we have space for everything else. Adding back the information we already had, it's still super tight. I can do this differently by putting the decisions in different directions. Mind you, I'm still maintaining symmetry. The next question is, are you an introvert or an extrovert? This is too cumbersome to ask when you can simply have them choose. So it's technically a decision, but I've styled it in the question format. From here, we add our lines one by one. You can see it's starting to get complicated. From afar, it may look confusing, but the experience of the viewer is that they're only following one line at a time. The last are the answers. I kind of placed them around the last question, but tried to fill out the rest of the space. We can communicate to the reader that they've reached the end of the tree by changing the answers to a color, and I'll just do this one by one so you don't get confused with all the lines. Starting on the left, I chose this red. I don't love that the entry to the answer is centered, so I'll fix it like this. Then systematically, beach introvert, beach extrovert. I'm using the same color for one answer and then the inverse styling for the other. To finish the section, foodie, wellness, and that's a decision tree. Back to the layout, I'll pop this in and we're done. I want to add one final detail on here. I was thinking about this earlier. Since our headline has the word lens, I'd like to give it some character by adding some blur to it, and then maybe on the border of the decision tree as well. Moments like this in the layout add some texture. Okay, now I'm done. Let's talk about the layout in the context of Gestalt Principles. Symmetry, we basically have it in every section. We use similarity to style the numbers and captions. In the decision tree, we use similarity so our reader can distinguish the different levels as they're going down, which makes it visually easier for them to follow along. This section is grouped by proximity. These two sections utilize common region, and continuation is being used here, here, and here. I didn't use closure, but I didn't find it was necessary for this layout. Okay, I hope that last example was worth it because I didn't do it for my health. Let me know in the comments what your biggest takeaway was. Check out more content on the channel, and I'll see you next time.